I think it's starting to change right now. And ChatGPT was the thing that really started to usher that more into the mainstream. It's by no means mainstream. They've got millions of users on it at this point, but it's still very early in the innings for this. Whereas I think within the next 5 years, though, we're going to start seeing the default switch.
All right, this is another episode of the Founders Pack Form Your Own Pack podcast. My guest today is Daniel Erickson from Viable. I don't know how I messed up that one. That was the other part I was worried about. How are you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
No problem. We talked a little bit before this, but so for people that don't know, who is Daniel Erickson and what is Viable?
Yeah, so I'm Daniel Erickson. I've been in the tech industry for the last 15 years or so, mostly on the engineering side. I've been in engineering leadership positions prior to this. I was VP of engineering at Ease, the cannabis delivery company. And before that was CTO at a company called Gettable in the construction space. And then earlier than that was an early engineer at Yammer. All of those experiences kind of cultivated this sort of obsession in me for using customer feedback to help guide a product roadmap and to really help companies improve their offerings. So about 3 years ago, my co-founder and I decided to put a company together in this space to help large companies understand their customers better by aggregating customer feedback from a bunch of different sources like call transcripts, survey responses, social media mentions, app store reviews. Basically, if your customers are talking to you or about you, we can take that text in, analyze it for you, and help you take action on it.
Very interesting. So I know in the past, like if we went back like 10 or 12 years, there was kind of like this trend of, I don't know what you called it. It was like social score, right? So they would kind of like monitor mentions out there, and there's a lot of those tools out there. So what is it that Viable does that's unique? Because it sounds like you're definitely in a, you've taken this to a different place, but what is the big thing that you guys do that's unique and the big problem you're solving?
Absolutely. So we use the technology from OpenAI, so GPT-3, to actually analyze the data that's coming in. We're not just giving you things like sentiment graphs and topic graphs and charts and things like that. In fact, our deliverable to you is a report. It's a fully written in English by a computer report that goes through and details your top issues, your most urgent issues, things like complaints, requests, compliments, questions that people are having, summarizes all of that nicely for you. So you can go through those, tens of thousands of pieces of feedback that you're getting every month and just spend, a few minutes each week reading through these reports to really deeply understand what your customers need from you.
Very interesting. So you're using the chat portion of that. Is that correct? Or are you using
actually just GPT-3 itself, which is actually the same exact system that ChatGPT uses. They just wrapped a UI around it and some reinforcement learning. We've done something very similar, but for feedback. And we're not actually a chat product so much as a generative analysis product.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, so it's a traditional user interface, but in the sense that you're able to pull that analysis using the engine. So that's amazing.
Exactly. So we built an actual analysis engine that digs in and looks at your feedback across all the different themes that we identify. Basically, what happens is we pull all this stuff in, we identify the different themes. So things like what are your top complaints, what are your top questions, requests, compliments, all of those things. And then we can actually identify like how big of a problem this is for you, how much of a risk for churn is this, all of those things that are sort of like top of mind for product managers.
So this feels like, would you say it's a very enterprise level play? Is it work for mid-size? Like what's kind of the size of the organization?
Yeah, generally speaking, the bigger the better. The more data you've got, the more valuable our analysis is going to be. For companies that are getting less than say 1,000 or so pieces of feedback per month, oftentimes a more manual approach can be sufficient for that. If you've got like a team of a couple of product managers that are able to sort of read through everything. However, if you're a big company like a multinational insurance firm or a big e-commerce company or something like that, you're getting thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of pieces of feedback every month. And it would take teams of dozens of people to just read through and tag all of that stuff, let alone actually do the true analysis of it. And so, the bigger, the better for us.
That makes total sense. How did you guys get your first customer, and what sort of advice would you give to other founders if you could only give one piece of advice?
Yeah, so use your network is the advice, because that's how we got our first customer. In fact, we sort of talked to our early investors after we got our initial product up and running, and we were able to find a couple of different companies that we could get into, and our very first customer came through those networks, basically.
That is amazing. I might have tripped myself up there because normally I always ask about the role of community or partnerships, but I mean, that's one story. What has been the role overall of community and partnerships in your success?
So both community and partnerships have been extremely important for us. On the community side, that is mostly on the investor community with us. We have a really great group of investors that have joined us here, including Craft Ventures, Javelin Venture Partners, and Streamlined, along with a handful of other investors and a large group of angels that have all been super helpful in introductions, not only to other investors, but even to other companies and customers for us. But on the partnership side, that's also been really important to us. I mentioned we're heavy users of OpenAI, and it's a really mutually beneficial arrangement that we've got over there. So we were one of the earliest companies that actually got access to it back in June of 2020. I think there were probably only a dozen other companies or so on it at the time.
That's early. Yeah.
So we've been deep in it with them for a long time now, and I chat with their team multiple times a week at this point. And so it's just building that sort of really close relationship to the important vendors in your space, I think is also just super necessary. So
I think, the one thing that I keep hearing, and I think I mentioned, I had a conversation with Jakob before, and he's been writing about AI tools that businesses can use and trying to help people think about, well, what role does this play? Because a lot of people are feeling threatened in their business, or they're just going to ignore it. What do you think? Like, how would a company start to think about using AI in their business? Like, I get the large enterprise companies, but what would you recommend to people that are trying to think of this, like how to use this thing that's got this umbrella term, but like what's one of the first couple of things that you would do if you were running a company?
Okay, so a couple of things here. I can go fairly deep on this, so stop me if I'm going in too far. But there's two kinds of companies that are being built. There are two kinds of products really that are being built on AI right now. Products that I call prompt factories and products that I call data pipelines. Generally speaking, I think that there is a short-term opportunity in the prompt factory use case, and these are companies like, say, Copy AI, Jasper. Basically, if you have your users write some sort of input, and then your system generates some sort of output as directly related to that input, you are basically building a UI around the the sort of baseline model that's there. Not very defensible, unfortunately, as actually evidenced with the advent of ChatGPT here, taking over a lot of those use cases itself, right?
Makes sense. Now, like here's your, it's like Google. Here's your thing for free.
Exactly. Now, on the flip side, there are data pipeline companies, and Viable is one of those, where you have some unique insight into a data problem that customers could face. Now, this could be something like Viable, where it's customer feedback or even employee engagement or employee feedback, where you're piping a bunch of disparate types of data in. You've built like a pipeline of models to enrich those things, to analyze them, and then kind of put out the report at the end there. But that's not the only example of one of these things. Like, I've heard of companies that are summarizing scientific papers, for instance. I've heard of companies that are doing the same sort of research, but for investment purposes. So like reading investor letters or any of those kinds of things, right? So if you've got some sort of data set that you need some sort of operation done on, the current generation of AI is actually really good at doing that. But you've got to build out a lot of those sort of pipelines. You've got to build out a bunch of different models to do a bunch of different jobs. And so those ones are going to be much more defensible. So to take that into sort of how do you add this into your own product here? I actually think there's a paradigm shift happening here. The way that people are going to expect to interact with your product is going to change due to these models. Eventually, I think that almost every product that you interact with on a day-to-day basis is going to use AI in some way. And generally speaking, that means you're going to be typing more and clicking less.
It's interesting you say, because it kind of brings up a couple of conversations I've had, and so I'm glad I asked you. I didn't even anticipate it, but we have this dilemma where for the last 10, 12 years, we're building traditional user interfaces. We're building like screens and tabs and buttons.
Yep.
And my argument to some, with some people that want to build recent applications is, I'm concerned that there is a trend, first of all, around the user interface. So I understand doing the, ML or AI in the back end, which is give me a better result or do the job that would normally take a button pusher. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, are people going to want to push buttons, tab from screens to do these things, or you just want to tell a thing to do it and it does it?
You just want to tell a thing to do it and it does it.
On that. But hey, make me a campaign with this data and messaging, and it just does the thing.
Yeah, if you could, hook up all of that to your data so that it understands your schema, and then you tell it what your objective is. Ideally, the system that you create there could actually just look at that, look at your objective, and say, "This is how we get there."
And then even write the copy, because
exactly.
It's like
we've got all the copy generators already. Like that stuff's right. In there.
That's why I'm like, kind of like, wow, why don't we think this through? Because if this takes 6 months to build or 4 months to build, and then do you have literally, a pet rock all of a sudden? I don't know. But the other argument is no, that's like a fad.
It's possible. So the thing that to do with that particular, with this particular thing is that your approach here, I think, is correct. However, you have to put guardrails up because right now, the way that these base models work is, yes, they will get things wrong sometimes. Right. And so a huge part of this sort of new interaction paradigm is actually checking work. And you have to build the right tools to go in and say, okay, is this accurate, first off? And you can do some of that in an automated way and generate multiple versions of things and choose the most accurate one and things like that. But sometimes you just need feedback from the user. And so,
hey, is this right?
Which is still, buttons and tabs and things like that. Yeah, but it's a confirmation button and not a I'm doing work button.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think even now, I'm working with one of our UX designers on a product, and I'm kind of I think I'm gonna go chat. However, I think we still need somewhat of a user interface. And I'm like, what do we do? At least we could turn one off if we ever had to. Right. But you still need to see the result. Which is insane.
Oftentimes, even within chat, you still need some kind of user interface. Like Chat GPT, for instance, whenever you have it generate code, it's not just plain text in there. They've got a full-on highlighted code system in there, which is a different kind of UI component than you would expect from a chat system.
Yeah, because it's coming up differently, you're saying, and it seems to be able to make rows, and it's not making a
it can do tables and things like that a little bit. I think in the future you're going to see a lot more interactivity in that kind of stuff.
I want to meet these guys. I don't know if I don't know if you've heard of Adept.
I have, yeah.
If you know them, I'd love an introduction.
Because I don't know them personally. I've just heard of them.
I'll have to make a more aggressive push, because every time I have this sort of conversation, and hopefully people are interested in this, but for me, I'm interested. Adept is really interesting because it's anything you can do at a screen, at a keyboard with a piece of software, it'll just do it for you if you tell it. That's the idea with Adept, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's the thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think they've already raised $50 million or something. So I think they're kind of ignoring my request. But Adept, if you're out there, I want to talk to you. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, Daniel, I really appreciate it. I know we went a little bit over what we normally do, and we talked about a little bit deeper on product. Thank you for your responses around community and partnerships. It's really important that we understand that, because I think that's how companies now scale. Money's important, but I think everyone, especially now, there's this request to be more capitally efficient. And I guess my argument is, well, community and partnerships are how you get customers, get them engaged, and then have partnerships that will also refer you and give you validation or do stuff you don't want to do.
It really is.
Yeah, makes total sense. All right, who is a good contact for you, and what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can, I'm probably the best contact for us. So just Dan at askviable.com. And you can visit our website at askviable.com.
Beautiful. All right. So as you know, when we have interesting people on the Founders Pack Form Your Own Pack podcast, we like you to nominate other interesting people who are either investors or founders of scalable ventures. Who would you, Daniel, like to nominate as a future guest?
I would say Rahul Vora over at Superhuman, if you haven't talked to him already. He's both an investor in us, and in actually that original round that we did with Kraft, he was one of our the first people to come in and say yes. And he's been just a super helpful addition to the investor network for us.
Rahul Vora, I have met you before. You probably forgot, but he was on my old podcast, Automate and Grow. And we were probably, I don't know, that must have been like 3 or 4 years ago. So I would love, actually, that's a great nomination. So Rahul, we'll accept that nomination. I know he's actively involved with a lot of startups. The one he actually introduced me to was his old intern, which was an interesting path. And we should follow up with the other Rahul, which was his old intern, who then raised like $3 million by graduating Y Combinator for Cohere.
Nice. Yeah.
So like, that's a great recommendation. Thank you so much. We will accept that, and we'll make sure that we follow up with Rahul, and maybe the other Rahul too. RGB, I think they called him.
Yeah.
Like Rahul too. But he's done some crazy stuff too out of his dorm room.
Indeed.
Cohere is a really interesting product, and you
really
probably
is.
have common customers, I would think.
We did.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Daniel, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to following your journey.
All right. Thanks for having me. It was great.